You brought up the difference between personality and individuality, and I thought that was so fascinating. So the one, to my understanding, is the conditioned you and how you feel you're supposed to show up in a way that you're going to get accepted by the tribe, and then that would be personality. Yeah. And then the individuality is your soul's essence, your purpose, something more divine and larger and kind of maybe karmic in a sense as to why you're here. Now, we are both, and we have so much of culture and parenting and conditioning, and if you get into epigenetic, like the personality is so deep and dense. If you are in this place where you're trying to identify what is my essence versus what is my conditioning, how do you have clarity as to which bucket that goes into? Because what I see in so many ways, it could be people that are talking about what kind of relationship they want to be in, and maybe they're super promiscuous and they're like, this is what I want, and like you can kind of see the self-sabotaging behavior in a way. But from afar, it's like everything's 20/20 hindsight. You're like, well, actually, this is kind of maybe why you're making these decisions, but you can't tell the person that. Another one was you made a post with your race car driving. And I thought that was so great because you can do the same thing, but the energy going into it makes all the difference. So I guess long-winded question is, how do you distinguish between that personality and the individuality?
So the quick answer is, from my experience, it is very difficult to find your individuality. One might say the authentic, true essence of your soul and how it expresses in behavior now. It's very hard to find that if you are swimming in your old survival stress and in your old traumas and in your old attachment wounds that aren't even old because they're with you right now. I don't know how to say it any simpler. It is very difficult to find that true, authentic self that can sustain when you still have quite a bit of baggage, if you will, monkeys on your back, many monkeys on your back and on your head, around this past stuff. What I've seen, Candice, is when people start to get their regulation on board, and I don't mean manage, there's a difference, and maybe we can talk about that too soon, is when they're really in regulation, they start to get these little hints and glimmers and sparks. And the way you know it's happening is someone will say, I feel really weird. I don't really feel like myself. That's one of the dead giveaways, because your self is your personality. And they'll be like, yeah, I just want to just stare at that tree and go like touch the moss. And all of a sudden I'm going to sing to it, but I don't know why. And it might be like, oh, well, maybe that's something you wanted to do when you were a kid and you didn't get to. And now that stuff is bubbling up. So that is how I think, from what I've seen, you start to unravel and find, because it's there. It's there. It's just, and this is what Casey was so great with. I was just reading him he's like my Bible. I read his books every night before I go to bed. And it's like, you are not going to find your true self if you are stuck in personality. Now, we need our personality to survive in our current world. Great example. I was traveling in the Philippines and Hong Kong with my husband. My mother's from the Philippines. My dad isn't. I'm half. So we're in the Philippines. Everyone's just crossing the road everywhere. It's just chaos, right? But it's organized chaos. And even in the big city, people are crossing massive highways. It's not a problem. So we get to Hong Kong. So we're in the Philippines for 3 weeks. We get to Hong Kong. I don't know if you've been to Hong Kong, but it's very busy. It's very ordered. It's Hong Kong. And we're waiting at this island to cross. And it's red, but there's clearly no cars coming. And my husband, who's never experienced these differences, starts to cross. And I fucking grab him. I'm like, what are you doing? He's like, well, you always jaywalk. I'm like, is anybody here jaywalking? He's like, no. I said, we don't jaywalk in Hong Kong. And he was so confused. And that comes back to safety. Like, it is not conducive to my safety in this foreign city to go with how I want to in my individuality, where I would cross the street if I was in Vancouver or in New York City or wherever. Like, you just wouldn't even do that in Switzerland, because it's like, you just don't do that. So that's one example of where sometimes you have to bring in the radar of, we don't do that here.
Mm.
And that's where there's this fine balance, I think, between manners and what's proper and societal decencies. But then if you can't let go of that when you're in the comfort of your own home, like I mentioned, walking around naked, if you can't let out gas and burp without having to say, excuse me, in your own home, something's not right. And we teach kids to do that, right? As opposed to, this is a normal biological process. I'm not going to make a joke about it, because God only knows guys love to joke about gas, and girls do too. But it's like, can it just happen without shame, pure biology, and then back to the authenticity, individuality. Another thing that people will say, Candice, when people start to get more regulated, real regulation, is they'll say, I feel human. They'll say that. I actually feel human. And then they go, I don't know what that means, but I actually feel like I'm human. And if we really think about what a human is, without the survival and without the trauma, we are the most magnificent machine, biological being, God only knows what. We've got so much stuff in us, higher brain, we still don't understand where it came from, really. And then we have this mammalian physiology that is still being driven by survival mechanisms that we still haven't perfected, and we're messing up because of how we child rear, right? And so all these things kind of go into one big kind of pot. And so how can one be in one's individuality, knowing that when they go into their car to go, like I said in that post, I love driving fast, but I'm not going to do that down the side streets where kids are playing. Of course, we know some people do that. They're not thinking about the other people. And so it's like this really interesting balance to find that expression of who you really are, but still fit into society and play by the rules. It's an art form, to be honest. And it's difficult, because if we were really living from our true biological nature and individuality, we would just, things would be a bit more chaotic, I think, actually, than they are right now. Just different. Does that make sense?
No, it totally does. It's, I feel like it's so funny because it's so much easier to assess someone else's stuff than your own, right? It's that old adage that I don't know who discovered water, but it wasn't a fish. So